Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 28 of JagaVision. Really excited to go into part two of our series on fermentation today. We're going to be having our friends at Philippi join us. Specifically, we're going to have the owner of, or the proprietor of Philippi. We're going to have Cliff Lear joining us. We're going to be talking bread and kombucha, specifically his sourdough. Philippi is been a really exciting business here in Victoria for quite a long time. As far as I know, Cliff teaches at the Grain Conference in the United States. When that happens, he's built his own mill. He's built his own wood fire oven. He makes really good bread and constantly improving and honing his craft. A little bit too much fun of a guy. So excited to have him on. Cliff, are you there? Cliff? Do we hear you?
There.
Oh, there
Is
you
that
are.
working now?
Okay, yeah, that's working now.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, welcome. Yeah, welcome to
Thanks for having
JagaVision.
me.
Yeah, no worries, man. Thank you for coming on. You want to maybe just tell the audience or the viewers a little bit about what it is that you do at Philippi, what the projection is, or the goal for the project, and what it is you're up to these days?
Well, it's constantly evolving. We started 11 years ago, almost 12 years ago now.
Okay.
So it's been an incredible amount of things going on, and then a lot of what we do still extends from previous years of work.
Right.
We started by milling uh, heritage grain, variety of red fife that I started working with a farmer 15 years ago when I was still part owner of Wildfire. It
Okay.
was a project we worked with Slow Food on at that point to bring back like ancient grains into commercial production. And so that necessitated getting into milling and as like a stage in the craft, being able to work directly with farmers and understand what goes into growing grains, and then to be able to have influence on the milling, which is very influential on final bread,
Right.
um, and then uh, and then fermentation and baking of bread. So it's super nerdy but very satisfying.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I feel like a lot
Yeah,
of the best conversations I've had on bread and on passion projects, etc., have been with you. So,
right.
yeah, no, that's awesome. So,
And
yeah,
then over the years, we've been able to kind of extend. We also have like a full line of pastries, and then
hmm
when we got our location downtown, coming up to 5 years ago, it'll be 5 years ago in November.
hmm
That was also to have more space for fermenting in other ways. We make kimchi and sauerkraut and a huge variety of lacto fermented pickles. Um, Paul Van Treat does our charcuterie program, and there's a lot of fermentation involved in like meat fermentation there, and we have a
right.
specific setup space for that. And then being able to use them like in sandwiches and in the restaurant Agrius that we operate as well. So a lot of the pickles and different fermented projects show up on the plates there too.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. No, I've had quite a nice range of flavors when I have ordered your plates that include some really interesting ferments. Do you make your there's obviously you're doing your own sourdough. That's also you want to talk a little bit about the. Oh, I have so many questions. I want to. There's the wild yeast. Before we go into it, though, I'll go with the one that popped in my head while you were explaining about bringing pastries on the line. There's a really cool series on YouTube with the unfortunately now deceased Anthony Bourdain, but he does this 24-hour layover in Paris. And before we went to Paris, I remember watching that and being so excited by his introduction to a particular bakery in that episode. And the owner of the bakery, though, he seemed to really feel that pastries and bread have completely different, what he called sensitivities. And so he didn't believe that
Oh,
a space could do both. But you do both. And in my opinion, and I'm not like a super chef or anything, but like I do love flavor. And I feel like the textures and the flavors you're able to pull off in both your pastries and your bread are so exceptional. But am I wrong? Are you are you maybe not as successful in your opinion in pastries than you are in bread, or vice versa?
Oh, I think they are very different disciplines,
Okay.
and even environmentally, like that was part of our actually our the reason we were looking for a space downtown
Uh-huh.
um, was because they have quite different environmental needs, and
Okay.
so to be able to control the space meant that we were able to execute both breads and pastries better, and also. It's not like a lot of what I do now actually is more like working with teams of people and helping to facilitate like whether it's connections to growers or finding products or even just like how to fit things in time wise and space. So there's a team, our man Brian Bradley, he heads it up and he's been working there since before we got the space downtown. He worked over at Dockside as well.
What is his name again? Sorry, it glitched out when you said it specifically.
Oh, Brian Bradley.
Brian Bradley. Okay, Brian
Yeah.
Bradley. Okay.
So he's been holding down pastry and like so incredibly focused on it. And has worked with a lot of different people over the years, and just a really great team right now with Takeo and Dave. And so that's part of it is creating, like I think a lot of what we do here is creating communities, and it's very different people. I work sometimes in pastry and sometimes in bread, but yeah, cooks are different than bakers. Bakers are different than pastry, and just like definitely like different personalities that are drawn to. And I think it's it's aspects of the job that brings in different kinds of people.
What do you identify as personally?
I'm definitely more of a bread guy.
You're a
Yeah.
bread guy. Okay, yeah, because I think like you did a company for a little blip there called House Bread, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Way back.
Way back. Yeah, I remember having it at that wine bar in Fernwood.
Oh, okay.
And just being like, wow. And then I found out it was like you post Wildfire, and then you open up Full of Pea, and I was just like super excited. So.
Yeah, that started in the basement of my house, and then and then I was working out of the old Princess Mary for a little while doing that.
Oh wow. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And just kept on moving forward with it. That's really exciting. So to be able to, I guess to summarize, to be able to facilitate the bread and the pastry, you've brought on somebody who you really trust with the pastry program, whereas you feel more of a bread guy, so you can really lead that part of the program, or do you also have a bread leader as well?
It's more like, oh, sorry, I'm falling apart here.
Yeah.
Like there's a pretty tight team, especially through COVID.
Yeah.
It's interesting as all the teams working together. Everyone's like, I think we really value what we do as far as like what we, who we get to work with and how we provide for our city and our community.
100%. Yeah.
And so it's definitely really tightened up all the teams that are working together, and
We've noticed that at JagaSilk too, for sure.
we do tend to, like in all departments, work a little bit more like collaboratively. And there is still like a hierarchy, and there's like, but it's definitely more collaborative teams where everyone is working, and that's what we try and do all through the company, like in the kitchen, and there's like hierarchical structure for efficiency of like information and decision making sometimes, but
Right.
we still everyone's contributing to what's going on there.
Okay. Awesome. So when I was at your space today, and we were kind of trying to figure out what we were going to talk about when it came to fermentation, for some reason I had it in my head like sauerkraut or kombucha, and then of course it was so obvious that this conversation would be about sourdough.
Bread, man.
Yeah, like what am I even thinking? So you want to talk a little bit about the process that, like, I guess I should cut this open and show everybody, but
Sure.
but
We got to cut open one right here.
you do on screen right there. We're gonna. Is that a boule as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a
Matchy.
matchy. So we have a sourdough. I'm gonna show the audience there, and then I'm gonna show you here. And this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing something smelling pretty awesome. Is this the red fife ancient grain, or is this can you talk about maybe also the yeast that's in this process? I imagine it's a wild yeast, and the starter and all that stuff. You want to maybe talk a little bit about it?
Sure. So it's all wild yeast. Yeah, that's one way we look at defining the breads, is like what kind of fermentation it has. So by having wild yeast, that's a combination of wild yeast and lactobacillus. And so the bacteria and the yeast work together, digesting and breaking down grains and producing, like the most noticeable thing is carbon dioxide gas, which
Right.
makes the cell structure inside. And then
Oh, interesting.
um, depending on how wet you make your dough, the hydration is also like pretty uh, like how we look at how breads are defined.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a bit of a higher, but not a super hydrated dough. It's about 70%. I think it's at 71% right now. We kind of adjust our hydration depending on which, as different batches of grain come in. That's kind of
Makes sense.
it doesn't do everything, but it's the easiest way to make adjustmts
Is that
to make
the
a consistent bread with different lots of grain that come through.
makes sense? Does different grains have different moisture levels? Then that would make sense, and that's why you. And do you measure that? Is there like a tool that you can, or is that done by
There
touch?
is a tool. Generally, grain has to be stored below 12% moisture, otherwise it can start getting enzyme activity. And as like there's seeds, you have to remember that there's seeds, and it's kind of amazing sometimes to be able to get these seeds in, and we grind them up and make bread out of it. It's very satisfying.
Yeah, I
Um,
imagine.
but if a grain is kept too wet, it will start to sprout. And that the first stages of a grain starting to sprout is there's actually enzymes that activate, and that happens when you first mix a dough. Enzymes are activated and start breaking down the starch and the protein structure.
Makes sense.
Um, where was it going with this? I got.
So maybe you can talk about, like, so you get different batches of grain. You're working with red fife. You're getting wild yeast for your ferment.
So
Um,
this wild yeast is a culture that I started maybe like 22 years ago now.
cool. Okay.
I first started, I built a brick oven in my driveway and started fermenting dough. And I kind of converted a room in the house into a little like bake room. And there was kind of like an initial wave. This would have been like in when was it? The late 90s. And there was like an initial wave of like artisan bread books that had come out. And you know, I learned from a guy that had like kind of moved around and helped build brick ovens in driveways, and then met him. I was working this little like anarchist bookshop, and met him, and we built a drive oven in the driveway, and I started baking bread. And it made sense to work with like wild yeast because it provides the most like unique, thinking of all of our foods trying to be, like unique to where we are, whether that's from like the water that's going into them or the yeast, like and the, the like not just yeast, but all the like microbiological influence we can have on food, I
Mm-hmm.
think is what makes it the most interesting,
Oh,
both
100%.
in flavors, textures, the aroma that comes out of it.
Hmm.
So that was part of the decision to go with that. It's just gonna like it's gonna make it more interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Like work with our neighbors here in Nootka Court next to Jaga Silk. We have Uchida Shokudo, who and Yasu has the owner.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know him. He's been on the JagaVision as well when we were drinking some hojicha together and talking a little bit about his project. And it's really interesting because of a similar like-minded philosophy to us and to you is this idea of like try and gather what you can. Um, to be able to work with locally, you can have an expression. Like for him, he has an expression that's very Japanese, but he's working with
Yeah.
very local ingredients, which is a really interesting way of going about Japanese food. And you having these French pastries and this kind of very, I don't know, like the name for le pie to me is very obviously it is French. You have this kind of French expression, in my opinion, of these local ingredients, and I find that process really interesting too. There's like a cultural component that's really interesting that transforms in a very authentic way using what you're able to source from these local producers, and in both culinary worlds, the French and the Japanese, there is domestically a big focus on that work with the fresh local ingredients, right? And that sometimes gets lost when you bring some of that technique to another country. There can be too much focus on importing these ingredients that are used locally, and I love this idea of glocalization. Like you can have themes that are from another country, but you can have the roots and the ingredients be so hyper local. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, the like learning technique that has been handed down from generations. I mean, particularly at this point in time when mean, it's not the same as, growing up in households cooking that way, or even like working in an industry in that country for, a couple of decades to really like understand it. But we can definitely at this point like start with like a basic understanding of culinary technique. And that was part of why we named, the bakery Full AP, was just kind of like an appreciation of the French,
Perspective.
the technique that has been handed down, and really has taken, such a long time, both in like our breakfast pastry, the viennoiserie, and then in bread making technique and even milling technology and things like that. Like incredible to be able to receive this knowledge.
Yeah, it's
And,
kind of honoring that, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
but a lot of it does come down to ingredients. That's why we started working directly with farmers to like, on wheat, and like with Yasu, the man helps pick those vegetables, and then he's preparing them.
Yeah.
There's such care taken
Yeah.
taken with how he prepares food.
The
And
technique.
it's simple. It's really expressive of the ingredients, and that's also what we do in pastry and at Agrius as well. It's a lot of times it's kind of minimal technique, and just highlighting what these ingredients have to offer.
Yeah. No, that's like kind of do a little bit and let it kind of speak for itself, right? But
Yeah.
there's a lot in that little bit. I think the complexity is in the simplicity, right? Like this is maybe we can open up this bottle of hojicha and we can talk a little bit about that and kind
Okay.
of draw some parallels. I was eating the bread, by the way, just for the audience. I didn't get a chance to tell you just how amazing this stuff is. Like the crust, man. The crust. A lot of people pull their punches with their crust, but your crust is always like really, really has an identity. And then the texture inside, like it's got, in my opinion, it's like the ideal moisture balance. I rave about you all the time. Like when it's like,
Thank you.
when I'm bringing bread, that literally means it's gonna be your bread. I love
Yeah.
what you do. So,
It's a satisfying food to be able to ferment on a daily
I
basis.
believe
These
it.
these get a about 24 hours fermentation,
Nice.
altogether.
And it's continuing an organism, which is pretty fun too, right? Like because you're that yeast structure, like moving it forward. And I would love you to open up the hojicha. Did you open up the spectrum?
Okay. This is the hojicha.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. So we've opened that up. We're gonna pour some out.
Should I get a glass?
Yeah. Oh, you can drink out of the bottle if you want. I like showing the liquid color to the viewers is all. So I'm just gonna. And one of my the fellow who helped me found the program, Jared Varani, he was always all about pouring it into the glass to really open it up. So maybe you should be pouring it
Okay.
into the glass to honor that.
Cheers.
Cheers, man. So there you go. That's the so the hojicha. Can you taste the hojicha in there? That kind
Oh
of
yeah, definitely. Yeah, no,
roastiness?
it's really nicely balanced.
Cool. Yeah, we really, what we've been doing for this is so working with that idea of drawing from local. This is a jun because it's fermenting using honey instead of using sugar.
Okay.
But technically, a jun would normally be made with green tea, and this is a green tea. So I guess this is a technical jun.
And sorry, can I just go quick? Do you use honey because it's hard to ferment honey, isn't it?
Well, not really. Once you dilute it, what's hard is when it's undiluted. There's this idea that because honey, yeah, it's a little bit more.
But I thought even mead makers often you have to have like yeast nutrient, and because honey itself has by nature for storage for the bees, it's got stuff in it that's
antibacterial. That's only true in its concentrated state. Once you dilute it, you can mold it. You can actually have some pretty hard times with it if you're not careful. It's all about dilution with honey, and so the little bees are actually spending a lot of time making sure that it's they flutter their wings and make sure that it's like dry as can be in their hives, and that's a major component of what's preserving it is this lack of moisture. It's about 80% combinations of different sugars, and maybe 20% moisture content in most honey. So that does vary. One of the steps we plan on doing in the future of our program is taking a Brix reading on each batch of honey that we get in, because seriously, there's such a varied level of intensity of sweetness from batch to batch.
Do you do Brix test on the finish of this?
We do, yeah. We do
Yeah.
we do a Brix test and a pH test. And so we're always
Okay.
trying to have between 3.7 and 3.8 for our pH. and our Brix is always going to be under 7.0.
Okay.
And then we're aiming for that. And then what we do is we use Frederick's honey out of Nanaimo, and we near, actually they're in Cedar, I should say, they're near Nanaimo, and they're this lovely beekeeping family, and we love to put their name on the bottle and stuff. And then we do this 7 to 17 day ferment, and we let the tea and the honey decide how long that ferment is going to be. Our goal is always 7 days. That's our, if our systems and our temperatures are dialed in, what we've kind of built our recipe around is this 7 day goal. But that can change when there's significant weather changes, etc. And then we use a SCOBY that we actually brought in from New York about 5 years ago. That was like a Jun SCOBY. We didn't know anybody at the time that we were like, hey, do you have a certified like health authority approved SCOBY? Because at the time that was a really important thing, and it's less so now. But anyway, so we brought it in, and then we've been working with it ever since, and it's been split. It's obviously gotten accustomed to this environment. It's gotten really interesting, and we do a process where we lager it. So we really wanted to also focus on flavor clarity. So if you look at the bottle, it says the days of tea extraction, and there'd be 10 days on there. And what that is we do a cold infusion because that brings up more fruit and floral elements. And when you brew hot, your tea loses its volatile oils in about 15 minutes, right? So I always feel like there's so much aromatic loss when people brew kombucha where they brew the tea hot. Whereas if you do a cold infusion, we make kind of like a flavor bullet, and then we pour that into the ferment, and then we add the honey, and then we let it go for as long as it takes to get to our ideal flavor balance. And then at that point, we actually put it into a big 150 liter chilling unit that's used for beer production. And we chill it, and then we do a cold crash of the yeast, and we blow the yeast out of the bottom because it's got a conical bottom. And then we bottle that. So it's like a very carefully measured, anywhere from 14 to 21 day, sometimes even 30-day process, which is kind of, yeah, it's been really fun. And I feel like it's really come to a point where we can, you can taste the tea. And when we switched to the bigger units, we used to do everything, if you can believe it, in these 15-liter crocks. And they were these super heavy, and it was just so crazy. And now we're doing, we told ourselves we'd never work with stainless steel, but we are now, and we can't taste. The biggest flavor problem was that the yeast structure just seemed to fall apart. And so what we found is that on day 3, and again maybe on day 7 if it's a longer ferment, giving the ferment a nice stir to really reawaken the yeast and redistribute it in the batch really helps to bring flavor balance once we get to the end. So bigger units have demanded slightly different processes, which has been quite fascinating. Do you find that? I've always wondered with bread, do you have to do, like, how do you distribute the yeast effectively in larger batches? Is there an issue that develops when you scale up that you need to sort of adjust things for?
No, it's pretty consistent. We control our water temperature and fermentation temperature, and we have the starter feeding at very specific times, and we weigh the ingredients and have it at specific temperatures. So it's pretty consistent for us, and there's some variation, and we change a little bit in the summer and in the winter. And we keep a fairly stiff starter, and then it just goes in the mix. We have mechanical mixer.
Okay, so just a mechanical mixer, and then that mechanical mixer and these weighing everything and controlling your applications of the starter, that just allows you to have a consistent fermentation every time. And then obviously a lot of it is taste, and there's mild changes, I'm sure, during the seasons. And
yeah, and we notice that, and that's something we're always as a team developing language around, because it's also, some things are quantifiable, like a water temperature and a dough temperature, but then there's some aspects of fermentation that are more tactile, and then trying to develop common language around that about how proof the dough was in the morning. And then we might adjust water temperature a little bit, as we try to minimize the variables. So water temperature and amount is the easiest thing for us to adjust, that gives us the most control.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah, we've been finding that that temperature is probably the major, the ambient temperature of the fermentation is probably the biggest sort of influence on our ferment that we found.
Right. So all our doughs go in like a special room overnight that controls the temperature, and then it's on a timer too to like change temperatures in the middle of the night at a certain time.
So you have it on a, like, is it like on a PID? Like, how do you, is it like a special room that's built for bread, or is it something you built
Yeah.
yourself? Or
Yeah, it's built for controlling fermentation. Most bakeries
so
have it's just a.
I'm so jealous.
Well, if you ever need them, the thing like a bakery is a standard piece of equipment in most bakeries. Our one, not necessarily to cool down like ours, but more and more because it eases production and gives more control. And again, kind of like by cooling it down and having a prolonged like fermentation at a lower temperature, you can get more flavor and texture development.
Interesting. Yeah, because we've been fermenting at 20 degrees centigrade, and that has been so ideal. And then we drop down to 18 in the winter, things go all weird. So I have to throw a heater in, and then I got to cool it down if it goes above like 21 or 22. Like that difference of 2 degrees centigrade seems to play such a massive role. Is bread that finicky? Are we talking like 1 degree, 2 degree has a major effect on the ferment quality?
It does have an effect. And it's a scale, depends on how long and at what stage in the fermentation it's happening at. We tend to like do like fermentation, like a period of fermentation at about 25 degrees Celsius, and a period of fermentation, which is more dormant than active fermentation at 10 degrees Celsius as well.
Right.
So 10 and 25. So that's quite a different range. And you do get like different. That's the thing with, particularly with lactobacillus, is different temperatures will produce different flavors because they'll produce different acids. Like they'll produce both lactic acid and acetic acid in different amounts and
that's really interesting.
At different temperatures. So depending on what kind of flavor profile you're wanting, you can kind of like adjust your bread for that flavor profile. Or it could be just like what fits in with your daily schedule, and that ends up by defining your flavor of your bread just based on like necessity.
That's really interesting. I bet you roast profiles, when they talk about it in coffee and they follow it with like a computer, and I bet you there's like I guess there's ferment profiles where different temperatures will achieve. Like obviously we want to have like
for sure
our ferment
100%
drop to 5 degrees, and I guess there is kind of a profile that we're creating with this sort of lagering stage and fermenting stage. But even in the fermenting stage of our kombucha, to draw from what you're talking about right now, there may be some interesting experiments possible where it's like there's like a curve where maybe it starts at 22 to get things kind of bubbling, and then it starts to kind of go down a little bit to sort of draw out the fermentation, because if it gets too fast, then it starts tasting like malt vinegar where it's like really harsh. And I imagine that can happen with your bread too. If your ferment is too quick, then you probably get some really harsh two-dimensional flavors.
That's almost exactly what we do. Most of our doughs are mixed the day before and coming out of the mixer about 22 degrees Celsius. And then they'll go into a room which cools it down to 10 degrees. And then in the middle of the night, it'll flip over and bring it over up to 25. So that then by the time we come in the morning, it's well fermented and at kind of room temperature again.
Oh, interesting. So you actually start hot, go cool, and then bring it up warm again.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so it could be even more multi-layered than I'm thinking. And different temperatures, just like roasting coffee and roasting teas. Like we do these Wuyi Mountain oolongs that have just an incredible charcoal roast. And we had one where it was like charcoal roasted for 8 hours at 95 degrees centigrade versus 100 degrees centigrade for 15 hours. And it's a charcoal roast. It's an open roasting system. It's not a closed one. Otherwise, we'd be drinking ash. But like, it's really interesting how those different profiles just brought out such completely different flavors. And talking to Josh Hawken, who's the director of the Specialty Coffee Association of Canada, he was talking about like how different temperatures draw out acetic acid or temper it. Or like, if you spend too much time at a particular temperature, you can actually reduce all of the acidity that you want. And if you don't spend any time in there, though, you don't develop or curb any of the acidity. So like different cultivars will also respond to different temperatures differently. So you must have like, do you have different fermentation recipes, like temperature recipes, depending on the bread that you're working with? Are you going to change that up?
A little bit, but generally we're also like making it work within it's humans making it, so it's also
Yeah,
like figuring out, and people, when people are expecting to buy bread, so some of it is also just like practical considerations. Like
fair.
recently, post COVID, we changed our start time so that bakers are now starting at 5:30 instead of at 3, just because after years and years of starting work at 3 in the morning, I'm just like, this is ridiculous. um, like it's when I was younger and really, I mean, I still love baking, but when I was like quite obsessive through my 20s, and didn't care about like sleep or when that was happening,
Okay, yeah.
and but then it was getting to the point, and then it's a consideration of like, it's hard to find staff. Nobody wants to start work at 3 in the morning. And
No.
so,
Even 5:30 is a push, I'm sure, you know?
yeah, but
Yeah.
5:30 is
Still feels
reasonable.
like a morning. It doesn't feel like you have to stay up all night just to be able to wake up at
Yeah,
3.
and
Yeah.
there's a certain like dedication you got to have, and bread does
Yeah.
take a certain amount of like dedicated to the fermentation.
That's interesting. What COVID's done for us has been interesting. Is we actually shut down since March our service to the public, and
Right.
then we just didn't. You hear about droplets and people being inside and all that stuff, and so we we actually haven't let anybody into our shop really since the pandemic. But as of September, we got a screen made where we have like kind of a payment station at our front door, and then
Okay.
we have tables out in the courtyard, and then we put a screen in the corner of the courtyard, and we actually have musicians playing live music from behind a plexiglass screen.
Okay.
And then we have these like measured off tables, and our servers serve everybody with masks and visors on, and it's like this super COVID careful setup, and we just do it once a week, and it's been interesting just how we haven't really seen a huge drop in T-bar revenue. If you would, it's kind of weird considering we're only open 1 day a week, because people just come and knock and ask for retail stuff the rest of the time, and then they just get their drinks on the Fridays. It's actually been quite interesting, and I think one thing that COVID has maybe taught me, and it sounds like it's a similar thing that you're talking about there, is that maybe I was pushing myself almost unnecessarily before in a direction that only made sense because I thought that's what I had to do. And then when kind of rearrange things so that it kind of fit more in line with what was more possible and more not comfortable but felt safer for even for fatigue sustainability. um, I think the response has been really good. Maybe just people are unusually understanding right now. I don't know, but maybe they're just happy that you have bread, right? And they're just like, I don't care if it's at like what time are you delivering bread these days? Like 10 or when are you getting that?
Yeah, we have baguettes out by 9,
Yeah.
and so it's not like totally ridiculous. We just changed method actually with our boules so that we can have it out earlier, and now we're forming it the day before, and then going through the same like cool and then warm up before we get in there, but in formed loaf. And that's been a big help. So that's just been something we've been kind of working on for the last week, and seems to be coming together now. So that has helped.
Nice.
Um,
Okay, so that
but
you
yeah, I
can.
mean,
Hmm.
in general, it's definitely slower for us, but we definitely like the people that are coming out are, it definitely has helped us like remind us of how fortunate we are to live in Victoria, and the how connected we are to the city, and how much people really value like good food here.
We
I
have.
think farmers, it's been a good year for farmers, even though I think overall it's down a little bit. That they're still getting like tremendous support from the community, and I think
That's awesome.
a lot of people like really valued our food and where it comes from,
Yeah, yeah.
tremendously.
I
So
think there's a lot of concern about farmers, especially during COVID, not getting the same sort of homes for their products. But like supermarkets are doing amazingly well. Restaurants are
yeah,
really struggling. Obviously, bars. I cannot imagine being a bar owner right now. Like it would just be the most horrific thing.
yeah,
Even if you're like super careful and you're like doing what we're doing with like screens everywhere and all that stuff, you're still not allowed to be open, right? So it's
yeah. And restaurant, like, I mean, we still we pivoted at Agrius to working with pizza,
yeah,
mostly so that like it was kind of like a format that allowed us to still work with all the farmers that we still work with,
right,
and like easy to like put all sorts of different vegetables on there, and works well with our charcuterie program.
totally.
But definitely we're not buying as much vegetables as we did other years, and we've been canning and pickling more this year too, to also try and support farmers, and that helps us out too, and allows us to offer like interesting things through the winter.
Totally.
But still, overall, we're not buying as much as we have like all the previous years, just because it's not as busy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, our farmers too, like the tea farmers, especially some of our connections in India. India's just been so hard hit.
Right. Yeah. Brutal.
During the second worst in the world, right, in terms of COVID-19, and they have had a couple of times where they had absolute lockdowns. Like I was kind of shocked because like here when we say lockdown, sure.
Yeah, people talk about lockdown here. No, we never had lockdown.
No,
here.
no. In India,
what people have actually had to deal with is
like they FedEx couldn't even move, right? Like I can only imagine what it'd be like. Can you imagine if like not only could you not leave your house, but you couldn't actually have people bringing stuff. Like there's no courier service because they're also shut down. It's like, wow, like how do I even survive in that environment, especially if it's like 2 or 3 weeks, right, where I'm not allowed to leave. It's like, okay, good recipe for starvation, really, like if you're not careful. So
right, but it was like the only response really available to them, because what was happening was people are getting sick and starving, and like it's like a very real situation there.
Yeah.
Same with down in Latin America as well.
Yeah, where like hospitals, they just never had the capacity in the first place, and then suddenly it's just, here we kind of have like, it feels like a really bad problem because it is, and the States it's just horrific, but that's mostly due to a number of factors, but mismanagement is the one that comes to the fore for sure, and I think that. When we see what's going on with Latin America, India, it's pretty troubling. Like even from just like a purely commercial perspective, the second flushed Darjeelings, they couldn't even go out and harvest them because they weren't allowed to have the pickers go out on the field. So they basically lost this harvest that makes up 80% of their revenue for the year.
Yeah, and there's no social assistance to like.
Yeah. So it's just
we've been very fortunate here.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm glad that you're around, man. I'm glad that you're making bread. I'm glad that Jaga Silk is allowed to exist. I'm so grateful to everybody that's been supporting this. So, I had just another question about your bread. I'm sorry to sort of pivot away from this really like.
Yeah. What time is it anyway? Do you have?
I have 5 minutes left of your time, just so the viewers
know.
Yeah, so we're at 1:40.
Thank you.
But can you tell me about what makes so during the fermentation, something that sometimes happens with breads that I buy, not necessarily from you, is there'll sometimes be these like big holes in the bread, or there'll be like it won't be as cooked as one might like. How do you get it so consistent? Like, is there just like it's just like temperatures and careful probing?
It's all, I mean, we still have variation. We're constantly striving to be more consistent.
Okay.
But I mean,
carbon dioxide,
controlling temperature and time are your greatest controls on biological reaction. So just controlling those as much as possible.
Because really nice structure in there,
And this one, and some of it is also handling technique, because we want a lot of we like a nice mix of small and medium size holes. Too big, the jam falls through, or the and so sometimes that's from also like handling. There's too much flour on it when you're forming it.
Interesting. Yeah, we use sometimes for our kombucha we use pu'er, like a dark tea, and dark teas are already fermented before we get them, and then they're aged, and we like to work with pu'ers that are at least 10 years old.
Really? I didn't know that 10 years.
Yeah, like that's kind of like your goal. You don't want to really crack open a cake before it's at least 10 years old when it comes to these.
And is that how they're stored, like in a barrel?
They're stored in like in a here, let me grab one. So they're stored in like a cake like this.
Okay.
And then you see it's I've broken off some of this cake, but they're generally can you see that okay? So that's for your camera. That's the audience's camera.
Oh, but so it's exposed to oxygen and everything.
The whole time, yeah. You just keep that storage process going, and that kind of develops the cake. And they say that the environment you store it in. Some people do it like they have pu'er caves where they'll like store it in temperature controlled and humidity controlled rooms.
Right.
And they'll do that for years on end. They'll also mimic particularly successful storage conditions. They say that so to qualify as a real pu'er, it has to be from southern Nanuo and Yunnan province in China. There's 13
Okay.
official factories that are allowed to make it according to the Chinese government, but at the village level, you do see people making it stone pressing instead of hydraulic presses. And then why I bring this up is what's so interesting is that when I put pu'er cakes into my fermentation, the way that they interact with the carbon dioxide is they seem to trap it. So I can put my kombucha at a fairly high Brix, like above 7, and I can get it to a place where if it wasn't pu'er, it would be foaming when I open it, or like pretty aggressive when I open it. But with the pu'er, it seems to trap the carbon dioxide in a way that reminds me of Guinness. Like it's like a really like smooth, like micro bubble texture. Like it's absolutely incredible how that ingredient changes the way that the carbon dioxide is released in the fermentation. I wonder in your breads, like if different cultivars of wheat would produce different sort of interactions with the sourdough so that you'd be able to create different textures in a similar recipe. Have you experimented with different? Sorry, this is like we have 2 minutes left. I'm asking you a big question, but with different cultivars, and have you seen a different response?
A little bit, but a lot of it it's the same with I don't know, to really know something, you got to work with it day in and day out for a while.
Yeah.
And so I've tried different wheats, and there's protein levels in wheats that are produced like somewhat due to genetics of
Right.
different cultivars,
Yeah.
but also due to growing conditions. Drought will push up protein levels, so that changes your texture. But then also, again, how much water you add will drastically change your texture of your bread. So
Okay.
they all influence each other, and that's why it's part of why all bakeries just make different breads.
It's this never-ending journey.
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, it's going to be influenced by whatever wheat you're using and the water and whatever yeast you got. And
Okay.
so,
Cool.
that's why I think it's awesome that people are making bread at home, because those are all going to be different breads.
Different environments,
and
different breads. Yeah.
enjoy them in different ways.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's quite a movement right now. We've hit 1:44. I have you for one more minute. I just before we end our session with you, Cliff, did you have anything you wanted to say about maybe the kombucha, the bread, to the viewers that you'd like to say as sort of like a goodbye to everybody?
I just feel very fortunate that I get to eat these breads and drink kombucha, and like all over the city, people are doing really fantastic things right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like really fortunate to know and everyone's like sharing ideas and techniques, and I think it's again, we're just very lucky to live here, and same with got great farmers growing awesome food, and thanks very much for having me on, and
No worries, man. Yeah, no worries. I'm really glad that you were able to make this happen. And you can find Cliff if you go to www.folepi.ca, spelled Folepi. If you want to look in the description on this video, if you're watching, you can also go and have a cup of tea at Folepi or Agrius, and it's going to be some Jaga Silk, which is pretty fun.
Thanks for keeping us well supplied.
No worries. Thank you, sir, for grabbing that for us. It's a fair, in the grand scheme of things, it's a fairly recent relationship, less than 2 years. And
couple years now.
Couple years. Okay, so a couple years is a long time, I guess. It still feels really new. I don't know why, but excited that it's happened, and looking forward to working with you even more. And I hope you enjoy the kombucha. I'm going to enjoy the bread. Thanks for coming on, Cliff. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
Okay, you take care. Peace.
Have a good afternoon.
Okay, bye. Too. Okay, so that was Cliff Lear with Folepi. Really appreciated having him come on. Again, www.folepi.ca. Sister Speak was going to try and join us as she's traveling right now. Looks like she wasn't able to successfully get an internet connection in time to join us for this conversation. So although she's in the description, she's not in this video. We had a really good chance to drink some kombucha and eat the boule from Folepi. I have to say, this combination here, spot on. Highly recommend it. Grab yourself some Folepi boule. Grab yourself some some Jagasilk Kombucha, and maybe hit up Farmhouse Cheeseworks and get yourself some nice cheese. And then you can just kind of combine those three together, and you're going to be in a pretty good place. So yeah, thank you for tuning in.